What happens when a life of quiet desperation collides with a world of limitless power? For Clara Rossi. A 24-year-old waitress drowning in debt. It was just another Tuesday. For David Sterling, the billionaire tycoon who owned half the city, it was just another business dinner. But one sentence, a single moment of courage from a woman with nothing left to lose, would set off a chain reaction. He laughed in her face, had her fired, and walked away. He thought it was over. But he was wrong. The next morning, this card arrived. This is the story of how a billionaire's cruel laugh turned into a note of surrender, and how one woman's voice proved more powerful than a mountain of gold. The scent of truffle oil, seared scallops, and money hung heavy in the air at Aurelia, a restaurant so exclusive its phone number was unlisted. For the patrons, it was a sanctuary of hushed tones and clinking crystal. For Clara Rossi, it was a battlefield. Every night, she donned her crisp black uniform, a suit of armor against the condescending glances and impatient sighs of people who spent more on a bottle of wine than she made in a month. At 24, Clara's life was a carefully balanced equation of exhaustion and anxiety. By day, she was an architecture student at the city's most prestigious university, a scholarship kid surrounded by the children of legacy. Her notebooks were filled with sketches of sustainable public spaces buildings that breathed with the community designs that honored history instead of erasing it. By night, she served foie gras and balanced trays of champagne flutes to pay for her younger brother Leo's community college tuition and her mother's ever-increasing medical bills. Her dreams were drawn on paper. Her reality was clearing crumbs from tablecloths. Tonight was different. A palpable tension had gripped the staff since noon. David Sterling was coming. The name echoed through the city like a thunderclap. Sterling wasn't just rich. He was a force of nature, a corporate predator known as the architect of ruin. He didn't build things. He consumed them. He bought legacy companies, stripped them for parts, and built glittering, soulless towers on their graves. He was handsome in a severe, chiseled way, with eyes the color of a winter storm, and a smile that never quite reached them. His presence commanded silence. When he arrived, it was with an entourage of two. Marcus Thorne, a slick, impeccably dressed man in his late 30s with the nervous energy of a perpetual subordinate, and Isabel Reed, a woman with a lawyer's sharp gaze and an air of quiet competence that seemed unshakable. The restaurant manager, Mr. Henderson, scurried over, bowing so low he was practically kissing the floor. "Mr. Sterling, your usual table is ready. An honor as always," Henderson fawned. David offered a curt nod, his eyes already scanning the room with a look of bored ownership. He didn't see the decor or the other patrons. He saw assets and liabilities. Clara was assigned their section. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Rule number 1 of serving the elite: be invisible. Be a ghost who refills water glasses and anticipates needs without ever being noticed. She took a deep breath, smoothed her apron, and approached the table. "Good evening. May I start you off with some water? Still or sparkling?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. David didn't even look at her. "Scotch, 25-year-old Macallan." "Neat," he said to the air in front of him. "Of course," Clara replied, her professionalism a shield. For the next hour, she moved in and out of their orbit, a silent phantom. Their conversation was the blueprint of her nightmares. They were discussing their latest, most audacious project, the Sterling Spire. It was to be the tallest residential building in the city, a needle of black glass and steel that would punch the sky. To build it, they were planning to demolish an entire city block, known as the Cobblers District, a charming, if slightly run-down area of pre-war brick buildings, home to family-owned bakeries, artisan shops, and decades of city history. Clara knew the district intimately. It was the subject of her final thesis. She had spent months documenting its unique architectural details, its robust community, and the surprising structural integrity of its century-old foundations. "The demolition permits are being expedited," Marcus said with a smug grin. "The Historical Preservation Society is making noise, but our legal team assures me their injunction won't hold." "It's not just about legalities," Isabel Reed cautioned, her tone measured. "The public sentiment is turning. They see us as bullies tearing down a beloved landmark." David scoffed, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Sentiment doesn't sign checks, Isabel. Legacy is a myth for the poor. Progress requires sacrifice. We level the old to make way for the new. It's the law of the jungle." He unrolled a large architectural render onto the table. It was a monstrosity. A cold, sterile tower that reflected nothing and offered nothing to the street below. It was a monument to ego. "It will cast a shadow over the park for 7 hours a day," Marcus added proudly, a testament to its scale. Something inside Clara snapped. It wasn't just the arrogance, the callous disregard for the lives and history he was about to bulldoze. It was the sheer architectural incompetence. She saw it instantly, a fatal flaw hidden in plain sight. As she leaned in to refill David's water glass, Marcus, in a gesture of clumsy enthusiasm, knocked a smaller, more detailed site plan off the table. It fluttered to the floor, landing right at Clara's feet. She picked it up. Her eyes scanned the topographical lines, the foundation schematics. And there it was. Worse than she thought. She placed it back on the table, her hand trembling slightly. She should have walked away. She should have remembered her brother's tuition, her mother's prescriptions, the mountain of debt that threatened to swallow her whole. But the words of her favorite professor, a woman who had championed her talent, echoed in her mind. Architecture is a public trust. A building that harms the community is a failure, no matter how tall it stands. She took a breath. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said. The three of them looked up, startled. It was as if a piece of furniture had spoken. Mr. Henderson, watching from across the room, looked like he was about to have a coronary. David Sterling raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. A slow, dangerous smile played on his lips. "You have something to say." Clara's voice was quiet, but clear, cutting through the restaurant's hum. "Your foundation plan. It's wrong." Marcus Thorne let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Excuse me." Clara pointed to a specific section of the plan. "This area, the northwest corner of the block. You have it marked as stable bedrock. It isn't. The city archives show that a subterranean creek, Tanner's Creek, was buried there in the 1890s. It was rerouted, but the original creek bed created a zone of unconsolidated alluvial soil. If you try to drive pylons for a building of this mass into that soil, without accounting for the hydrogeology, you won't just get settlement cracks. You'll risk catastrophic shear failure." The table was silent. Isabel Reed was staring at Clara, her expression unreadable. Marcus looked flustered, shuffling his papers. Clara pressed on the dam of her long-held silence now broken. "And that's not the only issue. The design doesn't just ignore the historical context. It's actively hostile to it. It will create a wind tunnel effect down 4th Street that will make the adjacent sidewalks practically unusable in the winter. It will destroy the morning light for the elementary school 3 blocks away. This building isn't just erasing history. It's creating a structural and social wound in the heart of the city. Silence. Complete, deafening silence. Clara's heart was a drum solo in her ears. She had just lectured the most powerful man in the city on his own billion-dollar project. Then it came. It started as a low rumble in David Sterling's chest, then erupted into a full-throated laugh. It wasn't a warm, amused laugh. It was a cold, cruel, dismissive roar that echoed through the entire restaurant. Heads turned. Patrons stared. It was a sound that stripped a person bare, that declared them utterly insignificant. He wiped a tear of mirth from his eye. "A structural and social wound," he repeated, savoring the words as if they were the most absurd thing he'd ever heard. He looked at Marcus and Isabel, then back at Clara, his eyes glinting with contempt. "Tell me what's your name." "Clara," she whispered, her face burning with humiliation. "Clara," he said, drawing the name out. "Thank you for the passionate analysis. It's been the most entertaining part of my evening." He reached into his wallet, pulled out a $500 bill, and tossed it on the table. "For your trouble." Then his voice dropped, turning to ice. "Now stick to pouring coffee, sweetheart. The adults are talking." He turned back to his associates, as if she had ceased to exist. The message was clear. "You are nothing." Clara stood frozen, the laughter still ringing in her ears. She felt the blood drain from her face. Before she could move, Mr. Henderson was at her side, his face a mask of pale fury. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her skin. "My office. Now," he hissed. He didn't wait for her to follow. He dragged her through the kitchen, past the stunned faces of the other staff. Inside his cramped, cluttered office, he threw her arm away from him. "Are you insane?" He screeched, his voice a choked whisper. "Do you have any idea who that was?" That was David Sterling. He could buy this restaurant with his pocket change and turn it into a private bathroom. You don't speak to a man like that. You don't speak to any customer like that. "Mr. Henderson, You're fired, Rossi," he snapped. "Get your things. Get out of my sight. I don't want to see your face ever again. Pray he doesn't decide to sue us for harassment." The words hit her like a physical blow. Fired. Just like that. Her lifeline severed. She stumbled back to the locker room, in a daze, the sound of David Sterling's laughter chasing her. She changed out of her uniform, her hands shaking so badly she could barely unbutton her shirt. She grabbed her worn-out backpack, the weight of her architecture textbooks feeling like an anchor pulling her down. As she walked out the back alley door, leaving the warmth and the scent of money behind for the cold, damp night, a single devastating thought consumed her. Her passion, her knowledge, the very things she was working so hard to build her future on, had just destroyed her present. The walk home was a blur of streetlights and despair. Clara's apartment was a tiny walk-up in a neighborhood that progress had forgotten. It was small, the paint was peeling and the faucet dripped, but it was hers. Tonight it felt like a tomb. She sank onto her lumpy sofa, the $500 bill from David Sterling still clutched in her hand. It felt dirty, like blood money. It wasn't a tip, it was a dismissal, a price tag on her silence. She thought of Leo's email from that morning, a cheerful message about his mid-term exams, with a gentle reminder that his next tuition payment was due in 2 weeks. She thought of the latest bill from her mother's physical therapist, sitting on her kitchen counter like a threat. Tears of frustration and helplessness finally came hot and bitter. She had stood up for her principles, for the city she loved, for the very essence of what she believed architecture should be. And for what? To be laughed at, humiliated, and cast aside. David Sterling's face floated in her mind, the cold arrogance, the dismissive wave of his hand, and that laugh. That soul-crushing laugh. She looked over at her drafting table, at the half-finished sketches for her thesis on the cobbler's district. Her beautiful, intricate drawings of a revitalized community space with the historic facades preserved and integrated into a new, vibrant public market now seemed like a childish fantasy. She swept them off the table in a surge of anger and grief, the papers scattering across the floor like fallen leaves. Maybe Sterling was right. Maybe she should have just stuck to pouring coffee. Miles away in a penthouse that occupied the entire top floor of a skyscraper he himself had built, David Sterling could not find peace. The view from his floor-to-ceiling windows was a glittering tapestry of city lights, a kingdom at his feet. But tonight, the view offered no satisfaction. The waitress Clara, her face kept intruding on his thoughts. It wasn't her defiance that bothered him. He was used to defiance. It was the certainty in her eyes, the quiet, unshakable conviction. And her words. They echoed with an unnerving familiarity, a structural and social wound. He paced his cavernous living room, the 25-year-old Macallan in his hand untouched. Where had he heard a phrase like that before? He stopped in front of a framed black-and-white photograph on his mantelpiece. It was a picture of him as a boy, standing next to a man in a hard hat, his father. Robert Sterling hadn't been a raider like David. He was a builder, an old-school craftsman who believed buildings had soul. He'd taught David how to read a blueprint before he could read a novel. His father had a favorite saying, one that David had long ago dismissed as sentimental nonsense. A bad building does more than just stand in the wrong place, David, his father, used to say. It carves a wound in the community, a wound that can fester for generations. David flinched. The waitress had unknowingly quoted his father's ghost. Superstitious rambling, he muttered to himself, trying to shake off the unease. He sat down at his desk and pulled up the Sterling Spire project files on a massive transparent screen. He zoomed in on the geological survey data for the northwest corner. It was marked green, stable. Signed off on by GeoCorp, the best engineering firm money could buy. Why would she claim otherwise? A buried creek. It was absurd. But the seed of doubt had been planted. It was a tiny, irritating splinter under his skin. He was a man who thrived on data, on absolute certainty. He detested loose ends. He buzzed his intercom. "Marcus?" Marcus Thorne answered instantly, his voice still buzzing with the sycophantic energy from dinner. "Yes, Mr. Sterling. Brilliant move tonight, by the way. Putting her in her place." David ignored the flattery. "Humor me. Get a second opinion on the geo survey for the Cobbler's District site. Use a different firm, an independent one. I want a deep core sample analysis and ground-penetrating radar scan of the northwest quadrant, and I want it done by morning. Spare no expense." Of course, Mr. Sterling. But may I ask why GeoCorp is the industry standard? "Because I'm paying you to follow my orders, not to question them," David snapped. "And Isabel," he said, patching her into the call. "Yes, David." Isabel's voice was calm as always. That injunction from the Historical Preservation Society. What's their core argument? They're citing the city's charter from 1908, the Historic Fabric Act, which protects designated foundational commercial zones. They claim the Cobblers District qualifies. Our legal team says it's a long shot, a desperate Hail Mary. I want you to pull the original city archives yourself. Don't rely on the legal team's summary. I want to see the original survey maps from the 1890s for that area. Cross-reference them with municipal waterworks records. I want to know if there's any mention, any at all, of a Tanner's Creek. A pause on the other end. Consider it done, Isabel said. He cut the connection and leaned back, annoyed at himself. He was chasing the ramblings of a waitress, wasting time and money to disprove a ghost story. And yet he couldn't let it go. He had built his empire on eradicating every single variable, every possible risk. Her words had introduced a variable he hadn't accounted for. He had to know. The next morning, Clara woke up to the shrill sound of her alarm. Her eyes were puffy. Her body ached with a soul-deep weariness. Reality crashed down on her again. No job. Looming bills. A future that had been a straight line just 24 hours ago was now a terrifying blank void. She spent the morning on her laptop scrolling through job listings for waitressing gigs, barista positions, anything. Each click felt like another nail in the coffin of her architectural dreams. Around 11 a.m. there was a sharp knock on her apartment door. She frowned. She wasn't expecting anyone. She peered through the peephole. A man in a flawlessly tailored grey suit stood in the hallway. He held a single elegant black envelope. Behind him, parked at the curb, was a sleek black Maybach, its engine purring silently. Her heart leaped into her throat. Was it from the restaurant? A lawsuit? Had David Sterling sent someone to intimidate her further? With trembling hands, she opened the door a crack. The man had a polite, impassive face. "Clara Rossi?" he asked. His voice was calm and professional. "Yes, this is for you," he said, holding out the envelope. "From Mr. Sterling." She stared at it, unable to move. The man, clearly a seasoned professional in the art of discreet delivery, simply placed the envelope in her hand, gave a slight nod, and turned. He walked back to the Maybach, got into the passenger seat, and the car pulled away from the curb as silently as it had arrived. Clara was left standing in her doorway, holding the impossibly heavy-feeling envelope. It was made of thick, luxurious cardstock. Her name was written on the front in elegant calligraphy. She slowly closed the door, her mind racing. She sat down at her kitchen table and carefully broke the wax seal, a simple S imprinted on it. Inside there were two things. The first was a credit card. It wasn't plastic. It was made of black anodized titanium. It had a weight, a substance to it. An American Express Centurion card. The legendary black card, an object of myth whispered about in the service industry, offered by invitation only to the world's wealthiest individuals. Her name, Clara Rossi, was embossed on the front. It was absurd, impossible. It was like finding a unicorn in her mailbox. Beneath it was a small folded note made of the same heavy cardstock. She unfolded it. The handwriting was sharp, angular, and forceful. It was only 6 words, but they hit her with the force of a tidal wave. You were right. More details to follow. DS. Clara stared at the card, then at the note, then back at the card. Her world tilted on its axis. The laughter from last night, the humiliation, the firing, it all seemed to warp and shift into something else. She wasn't just a waitress he had dismissed. She was the person who had been right. And David Sterling, the man who never admitted fault, had just put it in writing. The black card wasn't a gift. It was a surrender. And the note wasn't an apology. It was a summons. The email arrived 2 hours later. It was from the same impassive man who had delivered the envelope. His name was Arthur Pence, and his title was Executive Assistant to Mr. David Sterling. The message was concise and devoid of emotion. Miss Rosie. Mr. Sterling requests your presence for a meeting this afternoon at 3:00 p.m. A car will be waiting for you at your address at 2:45 p.m. The destination is the Cobblers District Construction Site Office. Please confirm your attendance. Regards, Arthur Pence. Clara's hands hovered over the keyboard. This was happening too fast. The site office. Why not his corporate headquarters? It felt like a test or a power play meeting on his turf, the very ground they had argued over. She thought about ignoring it, about throwing the black card in the trash and trying to forget the whole bizarre episode. But the note, "You were right," held a magnetic pull. It was a validation she hadn't realized she was starving for. She typed a simple reply, "I will be there." At 2:45 p.m., precisely the same black Maybach slid to a stop in front of her building. This time, Arthur was holding the rear door open for her. As she slid onto the buttery leather seat, she felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if she'd stepped into someone else's life. The car moved through the city with an insulated silence, the chaos of the streets muted into a silent film. The site office was a high-tech portable trailer complex, set up behind a chain-link fence, a stark white intrusion on the edge of the historic district. The charming brick facades of the old buildings stood in the background, looking like prisoners on death row. David Sterling was waiting for her inside the main office. He wasn't behind a desk. He was standing in front of a massive digital screen that displayed a complex, color-coded 3D map of the ground beneath the district. He wasn't wearing his power suit. Instead, he wore dark trousers and a simple grey cashmere sweater. He looked less like a corporate raider and more like a troubled architect. He didn't smile when she entered. He just nodded toward the screen. "Ms. Rosie, thank you for coming." Isabel Reed was also present, standing to the side with a tablet in her hand. She gave Clara a nod that held a flicker of newfound respect. Marcus Thorne was conspicuously absent. "This arrived an hour ago." David said, his voice flat. He pointed to a pulsing blue line that snaked its way directly under the northwest quadrant of the map. "The results from the ground-penetrating radar. It's an anomaly, a channel of high moisture, low-density soil, exactly where you said it would be. The initial core samples confirm it. Unconsolidated alluvial deposits, Tanner's Creek." He swiped the screen, and a new image appeared, a scanned copy of a faded hand-drawn map. Isabel spoke up. "From the city archives dated 1888. It clearly labels the waterway. It was buried during the Great Expansion of 1892, but the records were misfiled during a municipal consolidation in the 1950s. Our legal team, relying on digitized records, missed it. GeoCorp, in their haste to secure our contract, did a superficial survey and missed it too. You were right." Clara just stared, her mind trying to process the confirmation. Her thesis research, her late nights in the library, her obsession with the city's hidden history. It was all real. It mattered. "So you'll move the tower, or redesign the foundation?" Clara asked, finding her voice. David let out a short, humorless breath. It wasn't a laugh. It was the sound of profound frustration. "It's not that simple." He walked over to a window that overlooked the doomed district. "Ms. Rossi, what do you know about leveraged financing?" The question caught her off guard. "I'm an architecture student, not a business major." "Let me give you a crash course," he said, turning back to face her. "To fund a project of this magnitude, you don't just use your own money. You leverage assets, you create partnerships, you take on debt. Massive debt. The primary lender for the Sterling Spire is a consortium led by a rival institution, Titan Trust Bank." The name made Isabel Reed visibly stiffen. "Titan Trust," David continued, his voice tight, "is run by a man named Sloss Thorne." "Thorne?" Clara asked. "Like Marcus Thorne," his uncle, David said with a grimace. "Silo is a vulture of a different breed. He doesn't build things. He collects them when they break. He gave me this loan with predatory terms. There are clauses, acceleration clauses, that can be triggered by any significant delay or change in the project's scope. A 6-month delay to re-engineer the foundation and refile for new permits would be more than enough for him to trigger those clauses." "What would that mean?" Clara asked, though she was starting to dread the answer. "It means he could call in the entire $2 billion loan, due immediately. If I can't pay, he seizes the collateral. And the collateral isn't just this project. It's a significant portion of Sterling Consolidated's commercial real estate portfolio. He wouldn't just get the cobbler's district. He'd cripple my entire company, likely initiating a hostile takeover. He's been waiting for an opportunity like this for years." The reality of the situation crashed down on Clara. This wasn't a simple case of a billionaire admitting a mistake. David Sterling wasn't an all-powerful god in a skyscraper. He was a king, trapped on a gilded throne, surrounded by enemies. He was over-leveraged, exposed, and vulnerable. "So you're trapped," Clara said softly. "You have to build the tower as planned, even though you know it's dangerous, or you risk losing everything." "That was the situation as of this morning," David said, his gaze intense. "I called you here for a reason. You saw the flaw in the blueprints. You saw the ghost in the machine that my entire army of experts, lawyers, and engineers missed. You saw it because you weren't just looking at a project. You were looking at a place. You understood its context." He took a step closer. The air crackled with a strange, desperate energy. "I fired the lead architect this morning. I fired GeoCorp. I have Marcus Thorne confined to paperwork until I figure out what his connection to his uncle's bank truly entails. My team is compromised by arrogance, incompetence, or possibly treachery." He stopped directly in front of her. "I don't need another sycophant or a Harvard MBA who only sees spreadsheets. I need someone who sees the structural and social wounds. Your bill from last night," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the city, "is paid. Consider the black card a retainer. I am not offering you a job as a waitress, Ms. Rossi. I am not even offering you a job as a junior architect." He paused, letting the weight of his next words hang in the air. "I need a new vision, a solution that can be implemented without triggering Silas Thorne's clauses. Something brilliant, something fast, something that solves the engineering problem while placating the historical society, and most importantly is so compelling it gives my investors a reason to fight for it instead of letting Thorne devour us. I am offering you a partnership," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Help me fix this. Help me save my company." Clara was speechless. Less than 24 hours ago, this man had laughed her out of a room. Now he was placing the fate of his empire in her hands. It was a terrifying, exhilarating, and utterly insane proposition. She looked past him out the window at the beautiful old buildings and then back at the fatal flaw highlighted on the screen. She had a choice: walk away and return to her life of quiet desperation, or step into the heart of the storm. "The card," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "What is it for?" "It's for whatever you need," David replied. "Resources, materials, access. It's a key. The door you need to open is the one that gets us out of this gilded trap." Clara met his gaze. The fear was still there, but beneath it, a flicker of the same fire from the restaurant was rekindling. This was her chance, not just to build a building, but to prove her vision on the grandest stage imaginable. "Okay," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I'm in. But we're not just fixing your foundation, Mr. Sterling. We're redesigning the entire project, from the ground up." For the first time, a genuine, unforced expression crossed David Sterling's face. It wasn't a smile. It was a look of profound, desperate relief. The next few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and adrenaline-fueled days. Clara moved from her tiny apartment into a suite at a hotel David owned, a war room, filled with drafting tables, 3D printers, and a direct line to every department in Sterling Consolidated. The black card sat on her desk, a constant reminder of the surreal turn her life had taken. She used it not for luxuries, but for rare architectural books, specialized software, and consultations with independent engineers who weren't already on Sterling's payroll. Her entry into David's world was a trial by fire. The remaining architects on the project, a team led by a prim territorial man named Alistair Finch, treated her with icy disdain. They saw her as the waitress who had gotten their boss fired, an unqualified upstart. "The foundational rethink is unconventional, Ms. Rossi," Alistair said during one of their first meetings, his tone dripping with condescension as he reviewed her initial sketches. "A cantilevered suspension bridge design, integrated into a subterranean buttress system. It's wildly impractical. It's the only way to distribute the building's load away from the unstable soil of the creek bed without a 2-year excavation and re-engineering delay," Clara retorted, tapping a complex equation on the screen. "The math works. It's just not the lazy copy-paste solution you're used to." The room fell silent. David, sitting at the head of the table, watched the exchange without comment, his expression unreadable. But after the meeting, he called her aside. "Don't let them intimidate you," he said. "If the math works, make them see it." Clara did more than that. She didn't just design a new foundation. She created an entirely new concept for the project. Her vision, codenamed Project Chimera, was breathtakingly audacious. Instead of demolishing the Cobblers district, she proposed to save it. Her design preserved the historic brick facades of the entire block, treating them as a precious shell. Behind and above this historic shell, a new structure would rise, a sleek modern tower, but one that was set back, tiered, and integrated with the old buildings. The ground floor would become a sprawling public market, exactly as she had dreamed in her thesis. The upper floors of the old buildings would be converted into affordable artist lofts and boutique offices. The tower itself would feature luxury residences, but also vertical gardens, a public observation deck, and a design that used passive solar and rainwater collection systems. It wasn't just a building. It was an ecosystem. It was beautiful, sustainable, and respectful. It was the antithesis of everything the Sterling Spire stood for. She presented it to David in their private war room, her hands shaking as she walked him through the virtual model. He was silent for a long time, circling the holographic projection, his face a mask of intense concentration. "My father would have loved this," he said at last, his voice thick with an emotion she had never heard from him before. He looked at her, and for the first time she felt he wasn't seeing a waitress or a solution to a problem, but a peer. "It's brilliant. It's a masterpiece." But brilliance came with a price. Their work was being watched. Marcus Thorne, though officially sidelined, was still in the building. He saw Clara's rising influence and David's growing respect for her as a direct threat. His loyalty was not to David, but to the promise of power from his uncle Silas. The sabotage was subtle at first. A critical file for a zoning variance application would be accidentally corrupted moments before its deadline. A meeting with a crucial city council member would be mistakenly double-booked, forcing a cancellation. Clara found herself working twice as hard to overcome these mysterious hurdles. David, increasingly paranoid, trusted only Clara and Isabel. The three of them became an isolated island in the sea of his own company. The pressure was immense. The deadline from Titan Trust loomed like a guillotine. One night, working late, Clara was cross-referencing digital access logs with the timeline of their accidents. She was meticulous, a trait honed by years of balancing work and study. She found a pattern. A single user ID, Marcus Thorne's, had accessed every single file that had been corrupted or misplaced mere moments before the incidents occurred. Digging deeper, using a backdoor IT access code David had given her, she found encrypted communication logs between Marcus's terminal and an external server. A server she traced back to a shell corporation owned by Titan Trust Bank. The proof was undeniable. Marcus wasn't just an incompetent sycophant. He was a spy, actively feeding information to Silas Thorne and sabotaging their efforts from the inside. She printed the evidence and walked to David's office. It was almost 2 a.m. He was there staring out at the city lights, the weight of his empire on his shoulders. She didn't say a word. She just laid the files on his desk. He read them, his face growing darker with each page. The sense of betrayal was palpable. When he finished, he looked up at her, his eyes like chips of granite. "Thank you, Clara," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Tomorrow, the wolf in our house gets declawed." The morning air in the Sterling Consolidated boardroom was thick with the scent of expensive coffee and palpable tension. Light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing over the vast, polished mahogany table. It was a table built for titans, designed to make deals that shaped the city's skyline. Today, it was a stage for an execution. David had summoned the core investors of the Cobblers District project. They were a collection of stoic, wealthy individuals who looked deeply uncomfortable. Opposite them sat Marcus Thorne, summoned without an agenda. He wore a smug, self-satisfied expression, assuming the meeting was about the project's inevitable collapse, a failure he could pin on the Waitress architect and David's foolish sentimentality. He saw this as his final ascension, the moment he would prove his worth to his uncle. David Sterling stood at the head of the table, flanked by Clara and Isabel Reed. He looked as if he were carved from ice, his face a mask of cold fury. Marcus David's voice was low, yet it commanded the absolute attention of everyone in the room. "Thank you for joining us. We've hit a series of debilitating roadblocks with Project Chimera. Delays, corrupted files, security breaches. It's been unfortunate." Marcus leaned back in his chair, a picture of false sympathy. "It's a tragedy, David. As I've said, the project was flawed from its new inception, perhaps too ambitious for an unconventional leadership. The jab at Clara was unmistakable. If we had stuck to the original, more muscular design, the original design would have collapsed. Clara cut in her voice, clear and steady, refusing to be baited. We've established that. Marcus waved a dismissive hand. An engineering detail, fixable. Unlike this quagmire of preservation and sentiment. It's interesting you mention a quagmire, David said, his eyes locking onto Marcus. Because the source of the rot is often not in the design, but in the team. He nodded to Isabel. Isabel Reed, with the dispassionate air of a surgeon about to make a critical incision, stepped forward. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She simply began to lay out the evidence Clara had unearthed, displaying documents and logs on the large screen behind them. On October 12th at 11:57 p.m., Isabel began the final variance application file for zoning was accessed by a single user. 2 minutes later, the file was reported as corrupted, causing us to miss the submission deadline. That user was Marcus Thorne. Marcus's smile faltered. An IT glitch, I'm sure. On October 15th, Isabel continued ignoring him. A highly sensitive geological survey addendum was downloaded to an external non-company IP address. That user was Marcus Thorne. The IP address has been traced to a shell corporation, Viridian Data, which after unwinding 2 layers of ownership is wholly owned by Titan Trust Bank. The investors stirred, murmuring amongst themselves. Marcus's face had gone from confident to pale. He shot a panicked look at David, who remained impassive. And finally, Isabel concluded displaying the encrypted chat logs. We have a series of communications between your terminal and a known associate of Silas Thorne, detailing project vulnerabilities and timelines. You didn't just observe the sabotage, Marcus. You orchestrated it. The room was silent. Marcus Thorne sat exposed, the digital trail of his betrayal laid bare for all to see. He opened his mouth, but only a sputtering sound came out. The smug confidence had dissolved into pure, pathetic panic. David took a slow step forward. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it carried the weight of absolute finality. You were more than an employee, Marcus. You were someone my father trusted. You took that trust, and you sold it to the highest bidder for a seat at a table you will never deserve. You are fired. Your assets within this company are frozen pending a full investigation and 2 corporate espionage. Security is waiting for you outside. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the man with utter contempt. If I ever see your face again, it will be across a deposition table. Now get out of my sight. Defeated and humiliated, Marcus was escorted out, not even daring to make eye contact with the investors who had minutes earlier seen him as a peer. The victory, however, was hollow and fleeting. The damage was already done. The very next afternoon, a courier delivered a legal notice on heavy, cream-colored bond. It was from Titan Trust. In cold, precise language, Silas Thorne, citing project instability, leadership upheaval, and failure to meet preliminary deadlines, was invoking Section 7B of their loan agreement. An emergency stakeholder review was scheduled in 48 hours. If David could not present a city-approved, fully viable, and immediately actionable plan, the $2 billion loan would be called due in its entirety. The guillotine had been sharpened. That night, the war room felt less like a command center and more like a mausoleum. The holographic model of Project Chimera glowed softly in the center of the room, a beautiful ghost of what might have been. David stood before it, His shoulders slumped, the weight of a collapsing empire pressing down on him. "It's over, Clara," he said, his voice raw with defeat. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up for the first time she had ever seen. He won. He played the long game. And he won. "We have a vision, a brilliant vision, but we don't have the permits. We don't have the sign-offs. We don't have the time. In 48 hours, all I'll have to show them is a dream on a hard drive. Silas will call the loan, the investors will panic and flee, and he'll pick the bones of my father's company for pennies on the dollar." He looked at the hologram, his expression filled with a profound sadness. He used to say that a building should give back more than it takes. I spent 20 years thinking that was weakness, a failure to be ruthless. Now I finally understand him, and I'm about to lose everything he built. Clara watched him, seeing past the billionaire for the first time. She saw a son wrestling with his father's ghost, a man trapped by his own reputation. A fire ignited within her, an indignation that burned away her fear. She had not come this far. She had not endured the laughter, the dismissal, the contempt of men like Marcus Thorne to fail now. "No," she said, her voice cutting through his despair. He turned to look at her, surprised by the sudden force in her tone. "No," he repeated wearily. "Clara, be realistic. Realistic is what got us into this mess," she countered, stepping towards him. "We've been fighting Silas on his terms. We've been playing by his rules in his arena of legal clauses and financial threats. He's the master of that game. So we change the game. How we stop trying to sell them a contract. We stop trying to defend ourselves. In that meeting we go on the attack. We don't present a financial plan to a shark like Silas. We present a vision to the investors. We make them see this." She gestured to the glowing model not as a collection of assets and liabilities, but as a landmark. "We make it so beautiful, so profitable, so essential to the future of this city, that for them to side with Silas would be an act of corporate malpractice." David stared at her, a flicker of his old fighting spirit returning to his eyes. "They're bankers and real estate tycoons, Clara. They respond to numbers, not poetry. Then we'll give them numbers they've never seen before." She declared, her mind already racing. "We'll give them numbers wrapped in poetry. We will make our dream more tangible than his threat." The Titan Trust boardroom was an architectural statement in brutalist minimalism, grey marble, cold steel, and a chilling silence. Silas Thorne sat enthroned at the head of the table, radiating an aura of predatory patience. David's investors were there, their faces grim, their lawyers whispering anxiously beside them. David Silas began his voice, a smooth, venomous purr. "A pleasure, though I imagine not for you. My team has reviewed your project's status. It is, to put it mildly, a catastrophe. Shall we dispense with the theatrics and proceed to the terms of your asset forfeiture?" David stood projecting a calm he did not feel. "Not just yet, Silas. The situation has evolved. We have a final presentation. Not from me. From my lead partner on this project, Ms. Clara Rossi." A ripple of surprise went through the room. All eyes fell on Clara as she rose. She looked small against the backdrop of immense power, a young woman in a simple navy dress. She walked not to the podium, but to the center of the room, her laptop connected to the main screen. With a click, the bleak boardroom was filled with a sun-drenched image of the Chimera concourse. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady. "Before we talk about numbers, I want to talk about a place called the Cobbler's District. For nearly a century, it was a place where people built things with their hands. It had a soul. The original plan was to erase that soul and replace it with a monument to glass and steel. She clicked again. A virtual fly-through began soaring down the preserved brick-lined street into the sunlit, bustling public market. This is Project Chimera. It's not a compromise. It's an evolution. It argues that progress and preservation are not enemies, but partners. She then pivoted her tone, becoming sharp, analytical. But a vision is only valuable if it is viable. The sterling spire was projected to generate a net profit of $1.2 billion over 10 years, almost entirely dependent on the volatile luxury condo market. It was a high-wire act with no safety net. Her next slide was a dense but clear economic model. Project Chimera is a safety net. Its revenue streams are diversified. Lease revenue from the 40 restored artisan lofts and 25 retail spaces in the market will offset the entire preservation cost within 7 years. The LEED Platinum certification we are targeting unlocks over $50 million in municipal and federal green tax credits, something the Spire was never eligible for. The tourism revenue from the public observation deck and historical tours is projected at $15 million annually. We are creating a destination, not just a residence. She put up a final chart, a direct comparison. Over 30 years, the Chimera's stable multi-source model projects a 40% higher net return than the Spire's boom and bust model, with significantly lower initial risk. She turned off the screen and faced the room, her gaze sweeping over the investors before landing squarely on Silas Thorne. "Thorne is offering you an opportunity today," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "He is offering you the chance to pick over the bones of a project he actively sabotaged. He offers you litigation delay and a plot of land with a fatal structural flaw. He offers you the past." She took a breath, letting her words sink in. "I, on the other hand, am offering you a living, breathing landmark. A project that will win architectural awards, generate decades of stable profit, and become a beloved icon of this city. I am offering you the future." The silence that followed was absolute. Silas Thorne's face was a mask of thunderous rage. He looked at the investors, expecting them to scoff, to dismiss her as a naive idealist. But they were looking at their own tablets at the numbers Clara had presented. Catherine Lang, the most influential investor in the room, looked up. Her expression was one of cool, calculated reassessment. "Her projections are aggressive," Catherine stated, "but the diversified risk model is fundamentally sound. The public goodwill and tax incentives are intangible assets that our original risk assessment of the Spire never accounted for." Another investor nodded. "I agree. Siding with Titan Trust now means entering a legal battle over a dead project. This is a chance to be part of something genuinely new and profitable." Silas saw the tide turning. "This is absurd," he snarled. "She's a child. You have a contractual obligation." "Our obligation, Silas." Catherine cut him off, her voice like steel is to our shareholders. "And Ms. Rossi has just convincingly argued that the path of maximum return is not with you. We're backing Project Chimera." One by one, the other investors voiced their assent. The trap had failed. The Bate David's broken project had been swapped for a prize far more valuable. Silas Thorne, a man who controlled every room he entered, had lost control. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly on the marble floor. Without another word, he turned and stormed out of the boardroom, a king deposed from his own castle. 6 months later, Clara stood with David on a temporary viewing platform overlooking the Chimera concourse site. The sounds were not of demolition, but of careful creation. Masons were repointing the century-old brickwork. Behind them, the innovative web-like structure of the new foundation was being laid. The project was a global sensation. David handed her a thick envelope. "Your first partnership dividend," he said simply. The check inside was for a staggering amount. But beneath it was a letter from her university confirming the establishment of the Rossi Grant for underprivileged architecture students, fully endowed by her first payment. "You didn't just save my company, Clara," David said, his voice quiet and sincere as he gazed at the work below. "You saved me from myself. My father, he would have been proud of this. Of you." Clara looked from the check to the rising structure, a physical manifestation of a dream she had defended with nothing but her own voice. The humiliating laughter that had once shattered her world was now a distant, powerless echo. She had spoken up, and the world had answered not with laugh, but with the resounding sound of a new foundation being built. Clara Rossi's story is a powerful reminder that the most valuable assets we have are not in our bank accounts, but in our convictions and our courage. It shows that one voice speaking truth to power can be more formidable than any empire built on arrogance. She started as an invisible waitress and became an architect of the future, not by tearing things down, but by finding a way to build upon the beauty of the past. Her journey proves that your circumstances don't define your worth, and sometimes the people who laugh at you the loudest are the ones who need to hear your truth the most. What did you think of Clara's incredible transformation? Have you ever been in a situation where you had to speak up even when you were afraid? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story inspired you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories of courage and transformation. Thank you for watching.